is the only solution to join the EU. That might be the case, especially after Aston University released its damning Aston Report. The study talked about the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, the UK's post-Brexit trading agreement with the European Union. Understandably, when the TCA was put into effect in 2021, it saw a lot of criticism. However, during what was obviously a very volatile time in the UK, the TCA was seen as the best deal Britain could get. But was it really? Could Britain have gotten a better deal? Can it still get a better deal? Should the United Kingdom remain a part of the European Union? That was the simple, straightforward, and no-nonsense question that was asked from the citizens of the UK in 2016. Voters were asked to select between two options: leave or remain. The impact of their decision could not be reflected in the simpleness of this question. Truly, the intricacies of leaving the EU, or otherwise remaining a part of the Union, deserved more forethought than a question that posed itself as, what do you want? You have to remember that the British government would have honoured the results of the referendum unless very special circumstances were in play, which they weren't, because it cannot get any simpler than, do you want to stay or not? Yes, there were Leave and Remain campaigners who lobbied to emerge victorious in the aftermath of the referendum. Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage, for example, were advocates of the Leave group, and as such they provided their insights on why leaving the EU would be the better option. On the other hand, we had David Cameron, the UK's then Prime Minister, who called for the referendum in the first place, and Labour's Jeremy Corbyn, who exclaimed the lack of foresight in the Leave campaign's claims. It was a tough call to make, and with only a slight difference between the tallied votes, Leave was declared victorious. Cameron stepped down, and the UK began its formal withdrawal process. This was in 2016, or 2020 if we're talking about the day Brexit actually took place. Now we're a few years ahead, and we have to ask ourselves, was one question enough to substantiate a major turning point in the history of the United Kingdom? Having left the European Union on January 31, 2020, with an 11-month transition period, the United Kingdom left the European Single Market and European Union Customs Union with effect from January 1, 2021. Effectively, this would have demoted the UK as another trade partner of the EU, no different than any other country that was not part of the Union. However, the UK didn't just leave the EU, the nation formed a special status with the Union in exchange for a quid pro quo. What did the EU seek to gain from the UK? What did the UK seek to gain from the EU? Why couldn't the UK just withdraw from the Union as it had promised? Again, was one question really enough? There might never be a straightforward answer to that last question, and we might never know. What we do know, however, is that leaving the largest socio-economic and political coalition of Europe would have never been a simple process. The UK could have wiped its hands completely clean of the EU by evoking Article 50. This would have resulted in a no-deal exit from the Union, wherein both parties agree that the best way to move forward would be to cut their losses and move on. Again, this would have been something to consider on the day of the referendum. The EU 27 was the UK's largest trading partner, accounting for 45% of UK exports and 53% of UK imports in 2018. Article 50 would have evoked a shadow ban on anything sinister of that sort, and the E27 would still trade with the UK, albeit not as freely as they once did because of it leaving the European single market. Interestingly, the UK's second largest trading partner was the United States. At the time of the referendum, Leave politicians claimed that a silver lining to leaving the EU would be to set up better trade deals with the US. As of 2024, this glorious trade agreement between the UK and the US has not taken place. For the EU 27, the UK, with its second largest export market after the US and the third largest import market after China and the US, a deal was necessary to ensure that the UK's economy didn't collapse after leaving the EU, which, in hindsight, should have been a concern posed by campaigners when they were advocating to leave the EU during televised interviews in 2016. In any case, The UK and EU agreed that evoking Article 50 was not in either of their best interests. And so the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement, structured under Article 217 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, marked the new framework for post-Brexit relations. It differed significantly from the withdrawal agreement, minimising the role of the European Court of Justice, and comprises 7 key sections: institutional cooperation, trade law enforcement, thematic collaboration, financial provisions, dispute resolution, and final provisions. The 1,200-page document, along with its annexes and protocols, detailed complex trade arrangements, notably establishing tariff and quota-free trade, but with strict rules of origin, imposing bureaucratic burdens, especially on sectors like automotive, key issues, including fisheries, governance, and a level playing field. While the agreement preserved some EU access to UK waters with annual negotiations, both sides retained the ability to impose retaliatory tariffs. The UK exited the EU court's jurisdiction but accepted comprehensive governance mechanisms, including a partnership council and arbitration to handle its disputes. The TCA is thin on services, a crucial UK sector, particularly affecting road, air transport and financial services, where UK firms lose passporting rights now subject to the EU's unilateral equivalence rulings. This ultimately spurred some UK financial entities to relocate assets to the EU. Regarding cooperation, the UK can participate in selected EU programs like Horizon and Euratom, but withdraw from Erasmus. Free movement ended, impacting business travel and recognition of professional qualifications, requiring compliance with each EU state standards. David Frost didn't go into negotiations blind, obviously. He was instructed by then Prime Minister Boris Johnson to get the UK the best deal possible, which ultimately was the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. However, the terms of the agreement had to replicate or improve upon one of the EU's existing trade agreements elsewhere. That would be the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreements between the EU and Canada. The key similarity between the two agreements would be that they both represent significant international trade agreements with the EU, but that's about where the similarities end. They differ greatly in their primary objectives, scope, and structure. While both agreements aim to facilitate trade and cooperation, CETA is more focused on removing trade barriers between the EU and Canada, while the TCA, designed in the wake of Brexit, encompasses a broader range of issues between the EU and the UK. The Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, or CETA, is a wide-reaching trade pact between the European Union and Canada, finalized in 2016 and provisionally in force since 2017. Its primary aim is trade liberalization, specifically designed to reduce tariffs, simplify regulatory barriers, and open markets on both sides to goods and services. Under CETA, most tariffs on goods traded between the EU and Canada have been removed, thereby improving the cost-effectiveness and efficiency of trade for a wide range of industries. This agreement also provides Canadian companies with enhanced access to the European Union's vast single market, and reciprocally, it allows EU companies to access the Canadian market more freely. CETA is a forward-looking trade agreement in that it includes provisions for sustainable development, labour rights, and environmental protection, which align with broader EU values. However, it lacks extensive provisions on issues like law enforcement, judicial cooperation, or broader regulatory alignment, keeping its scope limited mainly to economic cooperation. Unlike CETA, the TCA is a comprehensive framework that addresses a wide range of areas necessary to manage the EU-UK relationship in the post-Brexit context. While it includes provisions for tariff-free and quota-free trade in goods, this benefit is contingent upon compliance with stringent rules of origin, which stipulate that products must meet specific production requirements to qualify. The TCA also introduces new non-tariff barriers, such as custom checks, certifications, and other regulatory standards which add complexity to trade compared to the EU's previous single market arrangement with the UK. CETA includes a mechanism for dispute resolution, but it is somewhat limited in its scope. Disputes under CETA are resolved through an arbitration process with no overreaching government body overseeing the relationship. In contrast, the TCA includes binding arbitration mechanisms for dispute resolution, but notably excludes the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, ECJ, over UK matters. This was a significant point during Brexit negotiations as the UK sought to remove the ECJ's influence from its legal affairs. Simon Asherwood, Professor of Politics and International Studies, and Dr. David Maloney provided an insight into the intricacies of the TCA and expanded upon some of its stipulations. 2026 will see the TCA being reviewed by both the UK and the EU, and both parties would have the opportunity to challenge it. The provisions set up periodic reviews of this cornerstone treaty between the two parties, the first of which is to start around May 2026 after 5 full years of implementation. Per Article 776 of the TCA, the parties shall jointly review the implementation of this agreement and supplementing agreements and any matters related thereto 5 years after the entry into force of this agreement and every 5 years thereafter. Notably, this provision exists in almost all of the EU's trade agreements, such as those with the United States, New Zealand, and Canada. Asherwood and Maloney believe that the UK would take either one of these 3 routes: the minimalist route, in which no changes are made to the TCA, and the review serves as nothing more than a technical review. Next comes the maximalist route, which would be something the ruling Labour Party might be interested in. To recall, while Labour adopted a more neutral stance during the 2016 referendum, probably to save face, but also slightly leaning toward remaining, Jeremy Corbyn greatly criticised the TCA. Labour claimed that it would renegotiate terms of the agreement when they came into power. They're in power. Lastly, the UK could adopt a mixed pathway wherein the details of the TCA are worked out, but a few provisions are made based on the systemic review of what worked and what didn't over the past 5 years. A fourth pathway is also worth considering here, the UK taking charge. Is there a clear and reasonable strategy behind the UK's European policy? If there is any doubt in EU minds on these points, then there is very little interest in doing anything more than the bare minimum when it's timed for the review. While the post-Brexit period has seen a big push towards strengthening international trade partnerships, and while the invasion of Ukraine has stimulated cooperation on security, that might not still be the case in 2026, especially if all of the obvious actions have already been taken. In 2024, the Aston University Business School released the Aston Report, a study that indicated the economic downturn of the United Kingdom in its post-Brexit transition with the EU. The report claimed that the UK-EU trade is likely to take a downturn over improving anytime soon. The economists who conducted the study issued a stern warning to the UK government, claiming that the TCA was not working and it never will. Per the report, the TCA has profound and ongoing stifling effects on the country's economy. Negative effects have grown over time, with trade declines in 2023 surpassing 2022, 2021, and so on. Data from 2021 to 2023 showed a 27% reduction in monthly UK exports to the EU and a 32% decrease in imports compared to projected figures without Brexit. Yearly declines are similarly stark, with exports down 17% and imports down 23%. David Frost's attempts at getting the UK the best deal that he possibly could, the Birmingham-based economist claimed that the TCA had disrupted the UK-EU supply chain across various goods categories, with only a few sectors, such as tobacco, railway, and aircraft, seeing export increases. Conversely, industries like agri-food, textiles, and material-based manufacturing have suffered the most. For example, UK exports of edible fruit and nuts dropped by 73.46%. The report also discussed individual trade relationships with the EU27. Reduction in UK exports was less pronounced in Belgium and Ireland, but more substantial in Germany, Spain, and Greece. Import drops were also noticeable, with decreases of 51%, 32%, and 23% from the Netherlands, Germany, and France, respectively. However, smaller economies saw increased imports from the UK. The study emphasises that Brexit has affected not only trade volumes but also product diversity. Industries like agri-food, textiles and materials manufacturing have been hardest hit, while trade with distant EU countries, including Commonwealth nations like Cyprus and Malta, have suffered the most. However, certain sectors such as tobacco, railway and aircraft manufacturing have shown resilience. Ultimately, the only way the UK could save itself would be to step up sector-specific negotiations with the EU to help struggling sectors, adopting technology to streamline customs and reconfigure UK supply chains for resilience. Prime Minister Keir Starmer is determined to reset agreements made with the EU during the Conservative Party's term. As such, it'd be fair to assume that the 2026 review would adopt the maximalist pathway we suggested a while ago. Ahead of the review, however, Starmer met with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz to discuss a bilateral cooperation treaty that would strengthen ties between the UK and the EU, effectively guaranteeing the UK the reset he had promised while also attempting to give the nation more autonomy in trade relationships. A new agreement, a testament to the depth and potential of our relationship with deeper links on science, technology, development, people, business culture, a boost to our trading relations, Starmer said at a joint news conference with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz in Berlin. An important thing to note here, Starmer is not proposing the UK rejoins the EU single market, nor has any such offer been made from the Union. His meeting with Scholz was followed by a scheduled trip to France, which many believe underscores the Prime Minister's commitment to rebuilding the UK-EU relations that have been strained since Brexit. Starmer emphasised that this cooperation treaty is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to boost collaboration in areas like trade, defence, technology and culture, with a focus on revitalising economic growth in both Britain and Germany. Alongside, Scholz claimed that Germany was eager to work closely with the UK, emphasising that the nation continues to be a key partner in Europe-wide issues post-Brexit. The proposed cooperation treaty, which could be formalised by 2025, is set to encompass several shared interests, including economic relations and defence. Both countries, which are NATO allies and lead defence spending in Western Europe, are exploring ways to enhance security collaboration. As negotiations progress, it remains to be seen how Starmer's government will balance improved relations with the EU while respecting the political and regulatory boundaries set by Brexit. Starmer reaffirmed his commitment to improve relationships with Europe, but emphasised that this reset does not mean reversing Brexit or rejoining the EU single market or customs union. On tackling illegal migration, Starmer stressed that defeating smuggling networks requires collaboration with European partners. He expressed gratitude for productive discussions on this issue and announced a plan to create a joint strategy to address illegal migration. The Prime Minister also confirmed the UK's renewed commitment to the Calais Group, a coalition including the UK, France, Belgium, Germany and the Netherlands, and the European Commission that works to strengthen cooperation on irregular migration. Is this really a once-in-a-lifetime trade cooperation agreement, as Starmer's claiming? Wouldn't it be easier for the UK to rejoin the European single market? These are questions that would only ever be answered once the 2026 TCA review rolls over. In the meantime, we have a few statistics of the UK's trade relationship with France to examine. The stats would provide some insight into how the TCA has affected the UK's relationship with one of the largest economies among the EU27. Also globally, France. France remains an important trading partner for the UK, being the fourth largest trading partner, making up 6% of the UK's total trade. In terms of foreign direct investment, the UK had £91.6 billion invested in France by the end of 2022, which was about 4.8% of all UK outward FDI. France's investment in the UK was slightly higher, with £114.8 billion making up 5.5% of the UK's total inward FDI. Total trade between the UK and France reached £104.6 billion in the 4 quarters leading up to the end of Q2 2024, which is a 2.5% increase from the previous year. This trade includes both exports and imports of goods and services. The UK exported £45.4 billion worth of goods and services to France in 2024 up to Q2 2024. This was just a slight decrease of £6 million compared to 2023. This trade imbalance resulted in a deficit of £13.8 billion with France, up from £11.2 billion in 2023. Specifically, the UK had a £14.4 billion trade deficit in goods, but managed a smaller surplus of £609 million in services, although this was down from £1.6 billion in 2023. All in all, a lot remains to be seen when the 2026 review rolls around. Will Starmer take the lead and reset trade agreements without reversing Brexit? Or will this become a persistent issue for the UK, which can only be solved if the nation regains entry into the EU? What do you think?